Well, Mike, it's been a while since we've done one of these shows. We've got to get back onto the routine of things. And for everyone, welcome to another episode of the Hector and Mike Experience. Common sense in an uncommon world, and I mean, we've got a lot to talk about. We've got the upcoming election. I know you've been working on a lot of these different races, as have I. We've got other clients that we've been trying to work with, and I mean, it's like right now, this that old saying, drinking out of a fire hose, and it feels that way. But the end is coming near. We've got 5 days left until this election cycle, and then we can get a
Let's hope
little
it
bit of
ends in
rest
five
and
days.
analysis. So,
Let's hope it ends in 5 days and doesn't go for another 2 months.
that's the part I've always hated the most, and it's like, so I like Tom McClintock, but there was a point in time there I didn't like him a lot because he ended up in all these statewide races, and they were a little too close to call,
Mm-hmm.
and so that meant I had to go move to Norwalk and live out there for 2 to 3 weeks right after the election,
Mm-hmm.
as they were doing all the counting. And at that time, there was nothing in Norwalk. I mean,
Right.
there was a couple motels and a couple Chinese restaurants, and that was it. But that's how I spent 2 to 3 weeks. It was like clockwork after every election. It was like, okay, another election, damn Tom McClintock. And it was just, living out in Norwalk. So glad I don't have to do that again. But we're getting indication from a lot of different folks that they may not be able to call the elections, a lot of these elections, until a couple of weeks after the polls close. And it just seems because we've got a lot of tight races, we've got a lot of investment that's going into it. I just saw the other day, it was 2 days ago, that Rudy Salas against David Valadeo there in the Valley.
Mm-hmm.
$29 million had been spent already on that one race, that one congressional race, a 2-year seat, $29 million. And like I said, that was a couple of days ago. So by the time election day is over and done with, I mean, that thing may be at 31, 32, who knows,
Mm-hmm.
$1 million spent. So
There's no shortage of money on either side. There's no shortage of the independent expenditures on either side. And the money is being shifted and moved around in the last week. Places that folks didn't think they needed to play, they suddenly find they need to play. Places where people have to play defense, they didn't expect to be playing defense, they have to play defense. So, and the one, and I've said this, if you want a stock tip from Hector and Mike, here's a stock tip for you. Go out and buy a radio station, television station, or newspaper anywhere in the state of Georgia, because what's going to happen almost certainly is that the U.S. Senate race in Georgia will probably not be decided on election day because you have to get 50% plus one. There's a libertarian candidate that's running who will take some votes away from Herschel Walker. And so that'll go into a runoff on December 14th, I think it is.
mhm.
And literally, it will be the only race in the country.
Well,
And
explain that one a little bit, because I know for a lot of folks, we look at November 8th as being the end of election, right? We look
right.
at, for us, it's the general election, it's over and done with. But what you're saying is here in Georgia, it's not.
No, it's what happens is, and it happens in a lot of southern states, they have a runoff. So what we had, let's say back in June here in California, we had 3 or 4 people running and nobody got 50%. And so it goes to the election in November. They don't have that in places like Georgia. In Georgia, on election day, for someone to win, they have to get 50% plus one of the vote cast. And if they don't, then what happens is the top 2 vote getters will then go into what they call a runoff that usually takes place 6 weeks after. So I think it's around the 16th of December or 14th of December with only those 2 candidates. So I think on the governor's race, that will probably be decided. All of the other state races will probably be decided. But the race in Georgia for the U.S. Senate has 3 candidates. Now, there's 2 major candidates, Warnock, the Democrat, Herschel Walker, the Republican, but there's a libertarian that will probably, the feeling is, draw just enough votes that prevents either one of those 2 from getting to 50% plus one. That's why they'll have an election just in Georgia. I think that's probably the only place that's going to happen. And that means every candidate, interest group, third party interest, PAC, you name it, is going to be spending money in Georgia because it's conceivable. I don't think it will happen, but it's conceivable that the winner of that race may decide who controls the United States Senate.
And
So
that's a good point you bring up, because right now there's the we've got the control of Congress, which we've got the House of Representatives, and then we have the U.S. Senate. And so right now, all the different political pundits are saying that Republicans are going to end up probably taking control of the House of Representatives, which means Nancy Pelosi will no longer be the speaker.
right,
And but the big fight, a huge fight, is happening over in the U.S. Senate.
yeah,
Right now, you've got Kamala Harris, who ends up breaking the ties for the Senate. She is as a vice president. She is a 51st vote or 51 vote that comes into the Senate. But should should we end up in a deadlock of 50-50 again, or a situation, not 50-50, but a situation where it may be that that particular race in Georgia, where that determines whether or not Republicans control the Senate, or maybe Democrats control the Senate by one vote.
right. I think the general feeling right now, to be an optimist on the Democrat side, is that it stays at 50-50,
Right.
and Kamala gets called out of the bullpen and casts a vote when needed. On the Republican side, there's several states that have been in play throughout the whole cycle, going back as far as last year. And within the last month, as you've seen polling start to turn and issues start to solidify, you see other places that Republicans did not have on their map as places they might win. Washington State is one of those places, of all places. The Republican, I think her name is Smiley, is 1 point behind incumbent Democrat Patty Murray, who everybody thought was safe. New Hampshire, the other side of the country, there's a Republican, Dan Bolduc, who won the Republican primary in September, and Hassan, Gene, I think it's Gene Hassan, who's the senator there, is currently, I think, 1 or 2 points down to him in the polls. So there are a couple of races that have popped up that they didn't expect. And so it could be that one race in Georgia. And if it is, then you can expect, if you own a radio station or TV station or a newspaper, that everybody and their brother is going to be throwing cash on your desk saying, I want to buy ads, I want to buy this, I want to buy that, I want to buy balloons, I want to buy airplanes, I want to buy anything I can buy. So,
Well, maybe you and I just move over to Georgia for that month or so forth, and we broadcast out of there.
I wouldn't mind doing that. Literally every other political operative in the country is going to be there. It's going to be, yeah. And this happened, by the way, in 2020. I mean, if in 2020, everybody was talking about the presidential, but it happened again in 2020. There were actually 2 Senate seats up in Georgia at that point in time. And both seats went to a runoff, and the Democrats won both seats, and that's how they were able to get to 50. And I mean, literally every political operative that I know, and that's a lot of them, were in Georgia from, forget Thanksgiving. They were eating pecan pie for Thanksgiving, forget pumpkin pie. They were down in Georgia starting, usually, I think it was like the Thursday after election. And they were there until, I forgot what date it was, but they were there till mid-December.
Yeah.
So it'll be an interesting one to watch.
Thing. But here a little bit closer to home, you've got today you got President Joe Biden that is out in California campaigning. He's been out here. He's been out here before. I think he was out here about a week and a half ago. And the other interesting part is he's been sending out Joe Biden out there. There's a lot of candidates that have not wanted Joe Biden because of his low approval numbers. And so they've been sending out his wife, Joe Biden, to go out and campaign. And it's interesting. We've seen a big shift in what we thought were going to be some of the salient issues here in California, as in other parts of the nation. There was a lot of it being the economy, but then after the Dobbs case, that basically undid Roe v. Wade, there was a shot in the arm for Democrats, and we saw I think it was Virginia, where there was was it more Missouri? I think it was, where they tried to do some sort of change the law to make it more restrictions on abortion rights, and that got eliminated. I mean, this just got eliminated by the voters. It
Kansas.
got
It was in
trounced.
Kansas.
Oh, it was in Kansas.
It
Okay.
was in Kansas. Nobody expected it, but yeah, it did it. It failed. Yeah.
And so, that became a kind of a rallying cry for the Democrats, saying, hey, look, we've got an issue. Here in California, the governor, smart, he put together Proposition 1, put it on the ballot. Didn't do a very good job of writing it well enough, but he's got it on the ballot. And, that has become, for the Democrats, I mean, when we see the ads coming back and forth, a lot of it are focused on abortion.
Right.
And yet you've got
Well,
Republicans that are focused on jobs, crime, homelessness, and kind of the bread and butter issues for a lot of voters. And so you're beginning to see kind of that interesting shift in how people are spending that money.
well, let's just start with what you started with, which is Joe Biden is in California 5 days before an election. Kamala Harris was in Massachusetts yesterday, 5 days before an election. Jill Biden was in Rhode Island 2 days ago, 6 days before an election. If that doesn't tell you the state of the Democrat Party and campaigns, nothing does. The fact that they have to be in California as opposed to in Ohio or Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin or Arizona tells you all you need to know. The fact that they take the vice president of the United States and send her to Massachusetts to campaign for a woman who's running, Democrat woman running for governor, who would probably win if the woman fell asleep and woke up the day after the election, tells you all you need to know. And the fact that, and I know this for a fact, Jill Biden in Rhode Island was there for the Democrat governor who's in trouble and pulled in all of 60 people to a reception. Okay, so that tells you everything you need to know. The fact of where they are spending their time as you come closer to the election speaks volumes. But it also speaks volumes if you listen to the president last night speaking at Union Station. And if you did, you should have had your head examined, just as an aside. But, he talked about the threat of democracy and the threat of this and the threat of that. He never talked about the threat of not being able to afford gasoline in your car so you can go to work. He never talked about how it's going to cost you 3 times more back east in home heating oil than what it did last year. He doesn't talk about how much more it costs you to feed your kids. He doesn't talk about the security or lack thereof that you feel in your home and in your community or at the border. And those are the things all the polls show that's what people care about. And we talked about this a long time ago, relatively speaking, a few months ago. Yeah, the abortion issue is a big issue for some people, but it is also something that is not an everyday issue for people. Every day when people are getting up and trying to fill their gas tank, trying to buy their food, trying to make that dollar go further, trying to figure out, are they going to be able to afford, their prescription drugs, trying to figure out how they're going to put the gas in the tank, wondering when that heating oil bill comes. All of that kind of stuff has created fear and uncertainty. And the other one I just want to throw into that equation is Wall Street. Now, you've got, what's her name, Warren and Sanders and all of that crowd, beating the hell out of Wall Street. And they seem to forget that there are a lot of average Americans who are not richy rich that are on Wall Street. They're there with their mutual funds. They're there with their 401k investments. They're there with their retirement accounts. And all of those things are getting the shit kicked out of them. And people are watching their retirement benefits go down the drain that they have built up over time because the market is tanking. Those are the things that impact everyday people. Doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter what nationality you are. It doesn't matter what party you are. It affects everybody. And that's where American voters are right now. And it's for the Democrats, for the administration, it's the worst place that voters could be,
Right. And that's,
except in
you know, that,
California.
well, California just always seems to be an anomaly, but I think for a lot of folks too is that, we're seeing, and I got, asked to kind of write about this not too long ago, which is why Hispanics are now leaving Democrats, or not willing to vote for Democrats, and why they're kind of going toward the Republican Party. And it's not that they're re-registering; it's just that for a lot of us, for a lot of Hispanics, we're seeing our life savings just kind of get sliced down. For a
Hmm.
lot of folks, you know, they care about the high cost of housing. They care about the taxes. They care about, I mean, just a simple thing of putting gasoline in your vehicle. There's all this tug and pull right now, and you've got OPEC, you got Russia, you got all these other countries that are decreasing production, and yet we're paying for it at the pump. You got Gavin
Of
Newsom
course we
running
are.
around, and I think we'll talk about a little bit more later, but going out there and saying, trying to blame everyone else for what's happening, and at the end of the day, it's we walk out of our homes, and for a lot of families that have to walk their kids to school, I mean, they have to walk around these homeless tents.
Hmm.
They continue to see on TV is the crime or someone getting shot down the street, and at the same time, everything's just costing more.
Right.
And so I think there's a sense of frustration where it's okay, where's something going to change now? Unlike almost every other state in the union, maybe except for Hawaii and obviously California, it's like I don't think people really care. That's the thing that bothers me the most is that here in California, whether it's the sun, whether it's the rays, or I don't know what the heck it is, but it's like people just kind of just want to go about their way. And it's like, oh, it's just we'll see how it goes, and
Right.
it's like I talk to some of these folks, and I'm like, you really want to make a change or difference? Vote opposite the way you normally have,
Right.
and that will send a rallying cry to the people saying, "Oh shoot, maybe I got to start paying attention to your issues."
It's it's the old Seinfeld episode where George Costanza decides to do the opposite of everything that he's done his whole life, and that's what they need to do here. Or. But I think you're right. It does reflect a certain acceptance in California of the way things are. I think one of the other things that's worth talking about as well, that's on the minds of American people, is the fact that one of the things the pandemic did is it opened the door or pulled the curtain back on what goes on in our public schools. Parents before the pandemic were like, I take Johnny to school, I take Mary to school, I drop her off, she goes in, she does her thing, she comes home, she does her homework, plays with her kids and whatever. And suddenly, because the pandemic was there and there was home, teaching from home and all this other stuff, the parents suddenly had a whole lot more involvement. And you see a whole new group of political activists arising amongst parents. Because again, you have one side of the Democrat Party that wants to talk about transgender kids in athletics. And, you sent me something last night about how transgenders are being discriminated against because they need a voter ID, which is, just you read it and it's laughable. But because they have an ID. I mean, that's all they need is they need the ID. I mean, it doesn't have to be what they think they are. Your driver's license says, is your ID, and you show your ID, and that's it. But that kind of stuff, the critical race theory stuff, that whole curriculum thing now has been exposed. And so you see more of a grassroots movement among parents that are saying, we're going to get involved and we're not going to let this happen in our community. And that's a whole new group of activists that weren't there before. And, I mean, I will say that Joe Biden has said, you judge us on our record. And I think that's what people are going to do next Tuesday. They're going to judge on the last 2 years of what has happened. And, they can say anything they want. It's just not having enough traction with voters. They can outspend Republicans 80-1. But if people don't believe it, you could spend 100-1 and it's not going to make a difference. And that's what's happening right now to them. And it couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people because the last 2 years have been pretty shitty out there. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's your prediction out here in California? You've got obviously we've got a lot of ballot measures, but I think really the thing that ends up the greatest focus is what happens legislatively and what happens in Congress. I think legislatively we've been looking at all these races. Republicans have a huge deficit to try to make up legislatively, and I don't think they're going to be able to make that up. I mean, I'm hoping that they could keep what they've got, if not maybe increase one or two seats, which is kind of a sad place to
It's
be at in the state
yeah.
legislature. But I think congressionally, I mean, I know we've made some inroads for congressional seats over the last cycle, and I think we can try to increase some of those seats now that we have here in California.
I think California. There's two things. There's the state and the federal in California. In the state, we had a good candidate who was grossly underfunded on the Republican side, and so Gavin Newsom, probably walks away with that, and that has a ripple effect down the ballot in state legislative races. There's no doubt about that. On the congressional side, however, I think California, what's been done in California is a great model that other states can follow, in that we have candidates who connect with and are part of the communities that they represent. Mike Garcia, David Valadeo, Michelle Steele, Young Kim. I mean, they are great candidates by any stretch of the imagination. They're hardworking elected officials, and they've run good campaigns. So I think all of those things combined, it doesn't matter if the Democrats are outspending them 3-1 or 4-1. They're doing the things they need to do. They've been doing them the last 2 years. They're representative of their community. And even though California may not have big wins on the state level next Tuesday, I think you'll see those folks win. And I think you may see a couple of more tilt to the Republican side.